Okay, so I'm gonna go back to sharing again. Sorry, there was a glitch on my end for just a second. Okay, so we did talk about, this is posted in week 4, this a little bit last week. If you are currently working in a school, you can use your school's information. Here, if you're not working in a school, you have one of two choices. You can either go back to week 3 and pull the data set and information about either the Dallas ISD Middle School or the Bossier Parish schools middle school. It happens to be Benton Elementary School, and use that information. Now, if for some reason you are using one of my data sets, you know, and you're trying to answer questions like what is distinctive, I understand you don't work in the school, you don't know that school. You can do a Google search on either school, and you're going to find all kinds of stuff. So I'm only looking for 3 to 5 bullet points. So hopefully you can find that through, like I said, a Google search, going on the school's website. There's always going to be stuff that schools are putting out there about their program. Okay. So how effective is your school? Again, you can tell somewhat from the data. You can also go to the state website, either in Texas or Louisiana, or the school's website, and it's going to give you some idea if they're rated as an acceptable school, if they have a letter, if they're grade A, B, C, whatever. And then how do you know? Just tell me where you found the information. So for example, Benton Elementary School has an, I'm making this up, has an A rating. They are the state archery champions, and their average teacher tenure is 12 years. How do I know this? Well, it's posted on the school's website. I found it in a news article, whatever. The other thing that you can do too, looking at what are your school's notable strengths, you should be able to pull that directly from the data, okay? So go through and look at the data. Where are they scoring really well? That would be something you can put right here under notable strengths. And again, under each one of these guys, I'm not looking for paragraphs. I'm not looking for dissertations. 3 to 5 bullet points, no more than 5, please, on each one of these areas. Like I said, I'm not wanting you to spend hours and hours and hours on this, okay? What are your school's main areas for improvement? Again, go back and look at the data. Look for those low areas where maybe they're not scoring as well as they should be. And that's what you can put here for the improvement. In terms of quality achievement, again, go back to your data. So, you know, you may be able to say, I'll pick on the Dallas ISD Elementary School. Reading is a strength for this school. And so, you know, because we have a whatever percentage passing rate, blah, blah, blah. Then you may note that we're not performing very well in math, particularly in probability and statistics, as evidenced by the passing rate of only 15%. And again, how do you know? Where did you find that? From the data packet, it's in the school's report card, etc. So in which subject and grades is improvement needed? So again, go back to your data. And you may notice that, let's say, 5th grade science is not doing very well. So that's an area where improvement is needed. What actions? If you're in the school, hopefully you know what's being done about it. If you are using a data set that I've provided for you, put down what you think should happen. So for example, 5th grade science is one of our lowest scoring areas. The students seem to have a lot of difficulty with understanding and applying theoretical knowledge. The way that this is being addressed is by ensuring that all students spend at least 2 days a week, 2 hours a week in the science lab working with the STEM teacher. Okay, you can make that part up. So what about disparities? So for example, you may be able to say that our students who are in a low socioeconomic status are failing at a greater rate than all of our other students. And so here's what you think should happen to address that concern. Same thing here for SPED and LEP. Look at those results. And if you are in your school, hopefully you know how to answer this. If you're using a data set, tell me what you think should be done. So it may be that we're going to increase the amount of time our special education students are spending with the resource teacher or the inclusion teacher in small group instruction. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I lost it. Let me pull it back up here. There we go. Okay. How does your school use student performance data? We review it once a month. We review it in our professional learning communities. We do benchmarking. There's a million different things you can put here. In terms of curriculum, again, base that on your data. So maybe if we're performing poorly in 5th grade science, the reason could be that we don't have a curriculum that is aligned to the state standards. Okay. So, how does your school ensure a broad range of learning experiences? Tell me either what you're doing in your school, or you tell me what you think should be happening within your school to make this work. Same thing about teaching. So like I said, basically, if you're working within a school right now, you can just list for me in bullet format what you're doing. If you're using one of my data sets, then you're going to be telling me basically what you think the school should be doing to address each one of these areas. Okay. And the how do you know questions are always going to lead you back to your data or to wherever you found that source information. Okay. So kind of makes sense. And if you really get stuck on a particular question, just let me know. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing that one. Hopefully go back to the course. There is also a sample. Let me share this real quick with you. I'm not going to walk you through it. Oops, where is it? Here's my sample. Sorry, my computer's being slow. Just 1 second. Okay, so you do have a sample that kind of gives you an idea of what's being said. This is obviously it's an actual school's plan, so there's tons of information. But if you're not sure what should be done, if you're using a data set that was given to you, there's lots of ideas here that can help you. Okay, and remember, I'm looking for no more than 5 bullet points. Ideally, 3 is sort of the number that I would want you to target. Okay. I'm going to look real quick here. Let's see. When it talks about student subgroups, yes, that does include special ed or students with disabilities or economically disadvantaged. Any other questions about this particular assignment? Part of it's factual, part of it you just basically get to make it up. Okay. All right. So going once, going twice?
My hand's up.
Yes, ma'am, go. Sorry.
Okay. So there are some data points like my school is different in that we're 2 schools that run concurrently in one building.
Okay.
But school, it's just that our data is separate. But we're using 2018-19 data, correct? Because we don't have any end of year data from last year.
Yeah, normally I would have you do the current school years, but you're right, because of the craziness that happened with COVID. Yes, you can use the most recently available data that you have.
And my data separates by subgroups, but it doesn't separate those subgroups by gender.
That's fine. Any place that you don't have data available, just put NA for not applicable.
Okay.
And that's fine. You won't lose any points or anything because, yeah, different states, different schools, different districts, whether you're in private or public, everybody reports their data just a little bit differently. So if you just don't have it, just put NA.
Thank you.
And yeah, somebody wants to know, can we still work in groups? Yes, you can. The trick is going to be, though, if you work in a group, you're going to have to choose one person's data or use one of my data sets to complete the assignment. So, sorry, my dog is just, I don't know what's wrong with her tonight. It must be a full moon. She's crazy. So, sorry if she came bounding in. Okay. Let's talk about due dates because I know there is some questions about this. So last week was week 4, but let me look at week 5 with you guys real quick here. Share again. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. So for this week, you do have a discussion forum, which is due this coming Sunday. I never make anything due in the middle of a week, guys. So it's always going to be the Sunday night of that particular week, unless I've given you a longer deadline. So your midterm or case study that we just looked at is not due until next Sunday, a week from this Sunday on the 16th. Okay, so you've still got a week and a half to work on that. Okay. Moving ahead to week 6, there is no discussion forum and there's not a reflective question. I know y'all are really sad about that, but I would really appreciate it if y'all wouldn't like cheer and clap and all that until after the meeting about this fact. We do have our last Zoom meeting next Wednesday. So if you're kind of struggling with getting this assignment done, because like I said, I know you guys are gearing up for school. Some of you are going back already. I tried to give you a break in week 6 so that you can just kind of get everything finished up. And in week 7, yes, ma'am, go ahead.
If we're done the midterm case study in week 6, there's nothing else for us to do except the Zoom?
That's correct. Yes,
correct. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now in week 7, that is our final exam week. So you do have to have this turned in by the 22nd. I don't know why that's hidden. I need to fix that. Anyway, there is not a discussion forum or a reflective essay either in week 7. Then all you have is the final exam, which I'm going to pull up here real quick. Maybe. Open. There it is. Like a Target commercial from a few years ago. Okay, let's see here. All right, so here's your final exam. You can do either a PowerPoint, a video, or a paper, and summarize what you've learned in this course. And I say everything, but by that I mean answer these 10 questions. So what you've learned, how you're going to use it, what was most useful, pretty self-explanatory. Now, number 10, editorial comments seems to kind of throw people off. Basically, that's just your opportunity to tell me anything you want to about pretty much anything, I guess. But ideally, you know, if there was something in the course that you really thought was awful, or, you know, something that you felt like was particularly beneficial, just whatever you want to tell me about the course, the learning, whatever that you think I need to know. You don't have to include an editorial comment, but I really do appreciate it when students do that, because I try to take that into account. So when I teach this course again, I'm always modifying my course constantly. So that is something that you can absolutely do there. So for your PowerPoint, at least 10 slides addressing those questions. You do not, you know, of course, we're always going to look at references, all that kind of stuff. But make sure, I do not want more than 20 slides. 10 is, you're not going to get a better grade if you give me 20 than if you give me 10. It's all about the content. The video, again, I say 10 minutes in length. I think I'm going to go back and modify that to 3 to 5 minutes. 10 minutes is a really long time for a video. Then if you decide to do a formal paper, 5 pages, especially if you double space, to answer those 10 questions. Okay? And that is everything to finish out the course. Let me close that. For those of you too that just want to do a marathon weekend and finish it all up, you can do that. I've set the parameters so you can start turning in stuff for week 5, 6, and 7 now. So sorry, I'm looking at the comments too here. So like I said, if you want to do that and get it done, say that's off your plate as you're trying to get ready to re-open school, that's great. If you run into problems and get behind, again, that's okay. Ideally, everything anything you have not turned in, I need by Saturday, August 22nd, the last day of the course. If you're not going to be able to meet that deadline, let me know. Just email me privately, and we'll talk about different options and things that you can do. Okay. Let's see.
Did you post the document for the final exam yet?
Yes, it should be there.
It should be in module 7.
Yeah, it should be in module 7 because I'm actually in student view right now. So yeah, just right here you'll notice. Well, maybe not. Hang on. Yeah, that's my overview. Where's my assignment?
The instructions, but I don't see
Yeah.
the link.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
right
found it. Just click on the where it says EDL 707 Spring 2020 Final Exam.
Yeah, and then once you, just like Ann said, once you open that
Gotcha.
up, just click on the hot link and it'll come up for you as a PDF.
And the extra credit from the last project is due on the 22nd as well.
Ideally, if I can have it a couple days before, because I want to, once I start computing grades, I want to make sure I get that in there. But yeah, if you don't get it to me until the 22nd, that's okay.
And just to clarify, we did a group project. So do we turn in our tools for extra credit as a group?
No, I need them emailed by individual. That way I can make sure I track the extra points correctly.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, if you've got 5 people in your group, Mary, there may be 5 people who send me the exact same thing, which is fine. I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody's extra points. Okay. Let's see.
After looking over most of our case studies, do you think that we need the extra credit?
No. I offer the extra credit because people freak out after the first discussion forum and the reflective essay. Because I've told you guys, I'm an English major in addition to special education, and I fully believe that graduate master's programs are to prepare you in case you want to get a doctorate. So I'm a stickler about APA. And a lot of people freak out because they lose points on the first couple of things. The course total is worth 400 points. So if you lose, I don't know, let's pick a number, 5 points off your discussion forum, it's really going to have a very negligible impact on your overall grade, because you can still earn 360 points and do fine and get an A. The big assignments, what I've graded so far, everybody's looking really, really strong. So you'll know way before the last week whether or not you need those 5 extra points added to your final grade. So like I said, my goal is I've graded everything up through the case study. And I've graded a few of those and I'm working on them. So I should have everybody's graded within the next day or 2.
Okay, good, because I am currently dying with starting back school.
Yeah, and I know this year is particularly challenging. More so than, it's always challenging every year, but I know this year's really hard. So that's why I try to give you guys a complete break in week 6, which is kind of your catch-up week, which hopefully will help you. And seriously, the final exam it's not something you need to cram for. It's not you know what I'm saying. It's pretty simple. Okay. Anything else, guys, before we kind of move on? Okay.
Do we all have the same definition of at risk? So that is like how my district defines at risk. That's just what I use for my data.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, different states define at risk differently. If you really want to delve deeply into it, you can always go and look at what the U.S. Department of Ed defines at risk as. But I'm not going to make you get that specific and that picky.
Okay. It's like our McKinney-Bento kids don't go into the at-risk group too, even though they're at risk because they're classified as McKinney-Bento.
Yeah, some states or some districts or schools will break out those numbers separately. Some of them lump them all together. So just report what you have. Okay, so you don't have to adjust or recalculate or anything like that to complete the assignment. Just give me what you have for your particular situation. Okay. Alicia wants to know about the pay for 11 point. I'm picky, but I'm not that picky. So You know, unless you give me like 36 point or something, you know, just be reasonable. 10, 11, 12, something like that will be fine. I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, you used 12-point font. And I said 11. Like I said, just don't do anything outrageous. Okay. Going once, going twice. Any other questions, guys? Everybody just take a deep breath. I promise you, you're going to make it through. We only have 2.5 more weeks. And like I said, while you've worked really hard up until this point, it'll begin to taper off. So y'all are going to be just fine. I know that for a fact. Okay, well, let's spend a little bit of time tonight talking about informative assessment. And for some reason, I don't know what it is. It's either my computer, which it probably is. But when I play a PowerPoint as a slideshow, all my screens go blank. So it's gonna, you know, I'm just gonna do it this way as opposed to the actual correct way to do a PowerPoint. So you can see the screen hopefully this way. So let's talk for a minute about what is called informative assessment. So a formative excuse me. So what do we mean when we talk about formative assessment? Well, we all know formative assessment is something that is done during and as a part of instruction. So for example, if I'm teaching a unit on 2-digit addition, I'm going to be using various formative assessment tools to monitor and track how well my students are doing mastering that particular objective. So that might be something like an exit card. It might be a timed test. It might be that I'm going to have my students use their whiteboards and share their answers. There's a million different ways to do formative assessment. Okay? Now, in some states, some people use the terms formative and formative and informative assessment interchangeably. But in this context, they really are two different things, okay? So let's talk about what are the two definitions of formative assessment. So according to James Popham, who is a pretty well-known researcher, formative assessment is planned, and it's a process in which students and teachers use assessment-based evidence to adjust what they're currently doing. According to the State Collaborative on Assessment and Student Standards, it's a process used by teachers during instruction that provides feedback and allows teachers to adjust teaching and learning so that we can be certain that our students are mastering the content. So, how does that differ? Let me go back here for a minute. How does that differ from informative assessment? Well, you could certainly argue the semantics back and forth. And in many ways, formative and informative assessment are the same. The difference is that most of the time when people are doing formative assessment, like I said, it's in the moment, it's during teaching and instruction. Unfortunately, most people don't adjust what they're doing within that teaching and learning to improve student outcomes. So that's why there's been a big push to really focus on the informative assessment element of assessment. Because when you talk about and you detail informative assessment, it's very clear that you need to make adjustments to be able to improve student achievement and help students to truly master the content. So, a couple of informative assessment ideas include, you can always do a thumbs up for yes, a thumbs down for no, or the side thumb for I'm not sure, maybe, a few, etc. I use this all the time, even in teaching my undergraduate courses here at LSUS, because it's a pretty quick gauge on how the students are doing. When I do that activity, if I do the activity, I get that formative assessment data, but I don't change what I'm doing in terms of teaching, that's where I'm falling short. That's why the term informative assessment is catching on more and more people are using it to describe that element of checking for understanding, where we gauge where the students are with that mini or sub-objective within a lesson, then we adjust accordingly. So what do I mean by that? So let's assume that, like I said earlier, I'm teaching two-digit addition to my students, and we have just done, I've had everybody show me on their whiteboards, you know, their total for 10 plus 12. And I notice when I look out across the room at their whiteboards that about half the students are not getting the correct answer. Now, I have options at that point. One, I can just keep moving forward and continue to teach and assume that those students who got the incorrect answer are going to figure it out and be fine. Number two, I can then change my instruction midstream at that moment to regroup the students so that those students who have done well and are getting the right answers can work maybe collaboratively as a group and continue to generate and do responses to questions. Those students who are getting the wrong answer now come to work with me as the teacher to facilitate their learning. Most teachers, and I have observed thousands and thousands of teachers, literally. Most teachers do the formative assessment piece. Very few do the informative assessment. Because we tend to think that even though a student didn't get it, if we just teach it again, or we teach it louder, that they're going to get it. When in reality, if we truly want to ensure that students are gaining the conceptual knowledge they need to be successful, we have to correct and fix those misunderstandings in the moment. Specifically, if a student learns something incorrectly, it takes 23 iterations of doing it correctly to unlearn that misinformation or that missed concept. 23 times they have to get it right to overcome that. So that's why informative assessment is such a critical element. Okay? So we're not going to do the brainstorming. You can think that through on your own. So what does research tell us? Informative assessments are ongoing. They happen, like I said, in the moment of teaching. One of the best teachers I've ever seen, she was truly amazing. She had a structure in her classroom where her students were in groups. And they would be doing each group was doing maybe something differently. But then as she was monitoring and facilitating the learning, she would give the students either a hand signal or call out, group whatever, and the students knew how to regroup themselves immediately. So she was really a master of this informative assessment. So when she noticed that this particular group of students were soaring and really had mastered this concept, but she had some others who were maybe falling behind, she would use a seamless process for those students to regroup themselves. We use informative assessment to improve the methods that we're using. And it also has a profound and positive impact on student learning. So it really helps our students when they make a mistake, but then they immediately get feedback and they're able to make that correction. It really does help them not only with their learning, but also motivates them. There's nothing worse than, back in the olden days, the teacher would teach something, you didn't really understand it, you'd take it home, you would do the homework all incorrectly, then you take it back to school and you get the paper with the big red F. That serves to demotivate our students. So when we make those corrections mid-course in the classroom, it helps to build that intrinsic motivation. Okay. So we're going to kind of move on with that one. Okay. So this is a flow chart that details for you what formative or informative assessment looks like. Now, on the left branch over here, it's about measuring what students can and cannot do. On the right side, this is what the teacher should be doing. And ultimately, all of this comes together so that we are able to see exactly where students are. So, it's not going to let me click on the boxes. We're going to keep going on. Okay? So the purpose of informative assessment is twofold. Number one, we want to move students' learning forward while they're still in the process of developing that learning. That's a critical piece. They're still in the process of the learning. It is also to let the teacher know how effective your instruction has been. I'm sure this has never happened to y'all, but I remember vividly teaching my freshman seminar class last fall, and I thought I had planned this great lesson, and it absolutely was bombing. I mean, it was completely bombing. And I realized that I needed to make a major shift and change because my instruction, it wasn't even close to being effective. Unfortunately, if we fail to act on those moments and make that change literally right there, then and there, we can be inadvertently reinforcing misconcepts and misinformation for our students. Okay? Sorry, this is a PowerPoint that I use actually when I'm doing teacher training. So what does the research tell us? Well, we know that we need to do a better job of differentiating instruction. Differentiation is like one of the current buzzwords, and I know how difficult it can be in a classroom with 22 to 25 or 30 students. How do you truly differentiate instruction? Well, one of the ways that you can do this is to measure what students already know and how they know and what they know. Excuse me, let me start that sentence over. It's been a long day. You have to know what students already know, and you have to know to what degree do they understand that concept. Secondly, once we know that, we have to pinpoint instruction based on where each student falls within that spectrum. So grouping and collaborative learning becomes paramount. Using peer tutors and allowing students to work in groups is very, very helpful in this particular area. Okay? When we do formative assessments well, it really helps our students to be more motivated. It helps students to be responsible for their own learning, and it really helps students to understand assessment and where they fall in mastering those particular skill sets. Okay, we're going to skip over a lot of this just for the sake of time tonight, guys. Sorry. Let's go here. Okay, so I'm curious. Let's go back one. So using benchmark assessments 2 to 3 times per year is considered informative assessment. If you agree, give me a thumbs up. If you disagree, give me a thumbs down. If you're not sure, do the side thumb. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not meaning to laugh at y'all, but some of y'all are doing like the kind of the wave. It's all different ways. Okay, so here's the answer. Yes and no. In some ways, it is informative assessment in that it does give you data and information. What makes it not informative assessment? It's not happening during instruction. So informative assessment happens on a daily basis, multiple times within a lesson, and allows us right then and there to make an adjustment in what's happening in the classroom and with our students. When we do a benchmark, it's really, even though we tend to think of summative assessment is happening at the end of the school year. We get the state test, that's our summative assessment. Summative assessment is anything that occurs after instruction is complete. So benchmarks, final exams, unit tests, chapter tests, weekly tests, those are all considered summative assessment. Informative assessment, like I said, happens in real time during instruction before learning is set for the students. So this would be, I disagree. Okay? So if we think about the tiers of assessment, okay? So you have formative assessment, which we talked about, which occurs minute by minute, and it's integrated in the lesson. You may have some interim assessment tools that you use. So that could include something that's maybe predictive. So for example, if you give pre-tests to your students, before you start a particular lesson or unit. And then you group your students according to that pre-assessment or that pretest. That is interim assessment. Summative, like I said, occurs at the end of learning and the end of instruction. So, another critical element that I want you guys to think about is far too often assessment data is owned by one person, maybe two. It's owned by the teacher and maybe by the campus leadership. In reality, assessment results, whether we're talking informative assessment, interim assessment, or summative assessment, should belong to the teacher and the student. Those are the two most critical people who need to be involved in this. So when we do informative assessment and we have students create their own learning profiles and track their own data, that is when assessment begins to make sense and will have a very strong impact positively on student achievement. Okay? Okay. So, agree or disagree? This one should be easier. Informative assessment has no impact on student learning or achievement. Yeah, I'm seeing pretty much everybody thumbs down. It has a tremendous impact. In fact, there are some researchers who believe that informative assessment is the single most powerful thing we can do in teaching and learning to improve student achievement outcomes. Okay, let's try this one. No, I'm not going to do that one. Sorry, it's too hard to read. Okay. True or false, or agree or disagree? Teachers won't use informative assessments if they cannot grade them. Yeah, I'm kind of seeing the wave again. When you think about informative assessment, a lot of teachers will not use them because they don't attach a grade to it. And unfortunately, I've seen that more often than not. In reality, informative assessment should never be graded. That's what summative assessment is for. Informative assessment is used to make, like I said, modifications in teaching, corrections in learning, and to support students' growth and understanding. It does not and should not be graded. Because once we grade it, learning shuts off for the student and they're not going to be able to move forward with that particular concept. Okay? So when we talk about, sorry, my little dog over here making sounds. I hope she's not disturbing you guys. So the differences I think we've talked about quite a bit versus informative and summative, but just a couple of key points. Informative happens while learning is in progress, so it's day to day, minute by minute. Summative occurs from time to time. Okay? Informative assessment is focused on the learning process. Summative assessment is focused on the product of learning. Informative is collaborative. Summative is teacher directed. Informative is fluid, whereas summative is rigid. Teachers and students use evidence from informative assessment to make adjustments for continuous improvement, whereas teachers use the results of summative assessment to determine failure decisions based on a fixed set of instructional activities. Okay? So, sorry, we're going to keep going here. So when we think about where we are in terms of our use of formative assessment, there is a scale that we have to, or a continuum, I guess is actually a better descriptor, of what we expect in terms of the quality of work and the quality of learning. So if we're going to impact both spectrums of this continuum, informative assessment is the way to do that. So for example, when you provide an exemplar or models or samples of what quality work looks like, and you use informative assessment with your students to help them gauge the quality of their work, this is how you improve this element. When you do that, at the same time, the quality of learning is also improving. So the continuum needs to happen through formative assessment. If you've taken EDL 707 or 700 with me, you know, we talk all the time about the critical questions from to 4. This is a great element to use when you're thinking about for informative and summative assessment. So first of all, what do we expect students to learn? That sets the stage for your planning. How are we going to know if they're learning? This is where you develop and use those informative assessments. What do we do when students are already proficient? Again, using the data from that informative assessment, how do we regroup and recalibrate what's happening in the classroom for students who've already mastered the concept? And then finally, how do we respond when students don't learn? So again, informative assessment allows you to differentiate between proficiency and lack of mastery and make instructional adjustments in the course of the classroom and teaching. Okay. So I'm going to skip quite a bit of this. So we also have to understand, and I really wish I could share this with our lawmakers, but we have to have a truly balanced assessment system. So that would include instructional tools like informative assessment, as well as an accountability tool, which is summative. The only thing people seem to care about is summative assessment. However, the real power and the real strength of teaching and what separates the master teacher from maybe the not so proficient teacher is how they understand and use informative assessment between or during classrooms. Okay, I'm going to skip on down here. Let's go back to which ones I want to show you. Also too, I think there's time that needs to be spent, whether it's through your professional learning communities or your team or whatever, that teachers really understand the difference between assessing and grading. So when we really think about assessing, assessing is to gain information that can be used and applied to modify instruction and teaching and learning. Grading is how we measure whether or not a student has mastered a particular objective. Far too often, the only thing that teachers use is grading, when in reality, the most critical part is truly the assessing. So, you know, one of the things that I've had discussions with many teachers about is, you know, is it okay if everybody in your class makes an A? Well, I think it would be great if everybody in my classes that I teach makes an A, because if they make an A, and I know my instruction is rigorous and it's relevant and it's tied to the standards that we're supposed to be teaching, if everybody makes an A, because I did an amazing job of assessing along the way, because I constantly use that informative assessment to monitor and to adjust my instruction to make sure all of my students mastered the content. So I really think it's kind of funny that we still think that we need a bell curve when we talk about grading, when in reality, what we're really all shooting for is on that summative assessment, particularly state assessments, is for everybody to get mastered the content or beyond. So very few teachers really understand the difference between this, but like I said, the most critical aspect is truly the assessing part, and the grading then will take care of itself. Okay? So going back to how do we make sure this all happens? Base it on Dufour's critical questions. So what do we expect students to learn? Make sure we have clear learning targets and we understand and we're teaching standards to depth and complexity. How will we know if they're learning? Make sure we have a balanced assessment system, which includes lots and lots of informative assessment pieces. What will we do when students are already proficient? That's when we move them forward and we allow them to move into either enrichment or go on to the next set of objectives. What do we do when students don't learn? Based on that informative assessment piece, that is when we intervene. And there's lots of different effective ways to intervene. So that is the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick. So what questions or comments or concerns do you have before we close it out tonight? You can either put them in the chat or just unmute yourself and speak right up. Okay, y'all really gonna let me off that easy? I know I didn't do the most amazing job. I hate lecturing.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay, I'll go second.
Okay, go ahead.
With the informative assessment, you talked about how it should be ongoing, like during your teaching and everything like that, and you see that the students aren't getting the information. Like, how long should you continue to? I know you said that once they get it, it takes like 23 times. Like, how teach the material for them to get it? Because I know, like, for us, like, we for example, like for math, we only had like a week. Like every week we had to have a grade, and sometimes I know my students didn't get it, and I had to keep moving. Like, I couldn't go back. So how does that work when you're in a system or a school with that criteria?
Yeah, and Sharon, you're probably not going to like my answer because it's a little bit utopian, but then I'll give you the practical answer as well. Ideally, we never move forward with new learning and new concepts until the student has fully mastered the foundational concept. Because if we don't do that, the lack or the misunderstanding or the problems with conceptual development only grow exponentially. So what do I mean by that? So for example, in 3rd grade, we traditionally start teaching multi-step problem solving using multiplication and division. If the student doesn't understand that foundational skill, way back in 3rd grade, when they hit 9th grade and they're in their first algebra class, guess what? It's not really the algebraic concepts that are messing them up, it's the computational pieces. And so we think all these students are failing algebra because they can't do algebra, but in reality, it's because they lack those foundational skills of calculation, and they get so caught up in that it really makes it seem like they cannot understand algebraic concepts. Now, I understand in reality, you know, we sometimes as leaders, both at the campus and the district level, impose arbitrary timelines on lesson plans, grades, etc. And while that is the reality, you know, Tracy, we're queen for the world, queen for the day, queen of the world, whatever, we would not teach that way. But because we have systems that require that, you have to get really creative. So what I would suggest doing is do a pre-assessment at the beginning of every unit. You're going to have some students who have already mastered some of the things you're about to teach. Move them out of the way, give them enrichment, let them do some other things that are going to benefit them. Then break your students into smaller groups based on the areas where they're struggling the most. And for example, what we did in my school was basically our focus was on what I call good first instruction. So if you plan the best lesson you can possibly plan, 90% of your students are going to get it when it's introduced. That 10%, we did lunch tutoring, we did after school tutoring. We would pull them, you know, we probably shouldn't do this, but we did. We would pull them out of PE, we'd pull them out of band, whatever other place we could possibly find to do intervention, we would do intensive targeted intervention. Far too often when we do tutoring, it's sort of very broad scope. We had a laser-like focus. So if Tracy had to go to tutoring, here's my learning profile. There's, let's say, 8 objectives for this week, and I've mastered 3. 2 of them are progressing, and 3 of them I have no clue. My tutoring was only based on those 3 objectives. And we didn't teach it the same. We taught it differently. We brought in all of the tactile skills we possibly could. So we approached it from the visual perspective, the auditory perspective, the kinesthetic perspective, etc. And I'm really proud to say that even in a huge high school with almost 3,000 students, every single student had a learning profile. They knew exactly where they were. And we did constant regrouping in classes, outside of class time, during lunch, etc. We would even, let's say we knew that Miss Jones was the absolute superstar in teaching Standard 1, and Mr. Asher was the absolute superstar in teaching Standard 2. We would constantly regroup the students, even though they were, quote, in this, you know, in Mr. Asher's class, they may go to somebody else's class to learn a particular objective. And that constant ebb and flow really, really helped our students. And we had a 99.9% graduation rate. But it was a ton of work and very time consuming, but it really, really benefited our students. And the more we did that, the better we got at it, if that makes sense. We, you know, like I said, I saw teachers who, and for my teachers who struggled with it, we as campus leadership, we would go into classrooms and, quote, observe, when in reality, we were there to help and coach you in the moment. So if I saw a great opportunity for an informative assessment piece that maybe you didn't do or miss, I would just kind of slide up by you and I would demonstrate that very quickly. Then I'd slide back out and you continue teaching. And then I would give you hand signals from the back of the room about, you know, and we had our little signals and our whiteboards to coach the teachers. And that coaching in the moment really, really got us to the point of truly superstar instruction. In fact, one year they hired every single one of my department chairs to write curriculum for the district. That's how good they got at this stuff. And I was in a very urban, diverse kind of school. I wasn't sitting in, you know, the most affluent school where everybody knew everything before they even got there. We just had to make sure we didn't screw up the kids, kind of thing.
So Tracy, what do we do when the curriculum is so scripted and the checks for understanding? I don't understand. Like, I know that I developed those reflexes as a teacher because I was allowed to do that, and they're so scripted. And if you leave the Tier 1 curriculum, then that's a mark off your compass. If you leave the PACE scale for the district, you would probably get fired. But she would definitely, Sharon, she would definitely get marked up for that.
I know, and you know, again, guys, I wish I could give you the perfect answer, but I've always believed, in fact, the tagline for the high school where I was principal was, we called ourselves the creative revolutionaries, because we had a scripted curriculum. We had a pacing guide, and we were seeing our students, a strange phenomenon was happening. Our students who were not doing very well were moving closer and closer to the standard, but our students who were way beyond the standard, 2, 3, 4 years above grade level, we were pulling them down to average. They were losing achievement. So my teacher, I'm harping on him. We got to follow the curriculum. We got to follow the curriculum, blah, 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 thinking I'm being a great leader. And thankfully, we had a school culture where they could be really brave and honest. And they told me, Tracy, the problem's the curriculum. If you will just trust us and let us do what we know needs to be done, we guarantee you results. And I knew as a leader that if our scores didn't improve, I'm out. So I just trusted my team. And guess what? That way they threw out the curriculum, they rewrote it. They did not have specific pacing guides and questions and checks for understanding. And by the end of the year, we moved to the highest level. We were the best achieving school in the entire school district of 205 schools. And everybody at central office, because it's all about results, guys, we're like, what did you do? What did you do? And that's the year they hired every single one of my department chairs to write curriculum. So you either, like I said, you either play the game and modify the system the best you can. You leave the school and find a place that understands what organic curriculum looks like and what real teaching and learning looks like in the classroom. Or you try to convince your leadership to give you some freedom and flexibility. And that may be in baby steps. It may be that you sit down and you're planning your lesson, let's say for next week, and you realize that instead of this particular activity, I have one that's going to be better. So I would rewrite that, go to my principal and say, hey, I want to try this. Will you come and observe me to give me feedback on this? And I'm telling you, as long as my teachers were getting results and made the school look good, all the better for everybody. Does that kind of make sense?
It's
No,
tied
so
to
there's
our
not-
accountability. We can lose and they can lose their certification as leadership. So how is that?
Trust me, I was in a high stakes environment too, where we could lose our certification, we could lose a whole lot. But if what you're doing is not benefiting the students, you've got to do something different. And if you're in an environment where that's not allowed, personally, I'd be looking for another place to go. I appreciate and understand, Mary, what you're saying, but sometimes we have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Train and develop our leadership to understand the dynamics of the classroom. And that may be very small baby steps along the way, where you make suggestions or you volunteer to be on the curriculum team or whatever you can do. But lockstep curriculum is never going to be delivered with 100% fidelity from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, because the students are all different. So does that make sense? Like I said, live within the parameters you're given, but when you see an opportunity to push your kids forward, take it. And along the way, help develop those leaders to understand what true, effective teaching and learning looks like. Does that kind of help? Probably not. Because there's really no great answer, guys. It's been proven through research a million times. Lockstep, scripted curriculum does not work. You may get
Make sure, Miss Tracy, they need to make sure when they become leaders of the campus that they build in, even though the district pacing guides, most districts now pace in reteaching or during become administrators and have our own school, we need to build that in to our school schedule for that valuable reteaching time.
Yeah, Lisa, that's a great point. You know, so some of you are in this class because you're in the MEDCI program. Some of you are here in the Ed Leadership program. Remember the good stuff when you're in that leadership role and you can affect a change. Remember those things and be the change. Secondly, carve out or steal other times, whether it's a reteaching block, an enrichment block. I pull my students in. You know, I never had a 30-minute duty-free lunch because I always had kids in my room. Even as a principal, I had kids in my office because we were always talking and working on something. Pull in those other times because at the end of the day, guys, I don't care where you are. If you get results, nobody's going to say anything about you not following everything to the T. So if you get 100% of your students to reach mastery level on a state assessment, they're not going to ding you because you weren't on the pacing guide. But that takes a lot of risk taking, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. It's just, like I said, Lisa, you're right, pull in when you can, whether it's reteaching block, whatever. And it is at the end of the day, guys, even in the most high stakes accountability systems you can think of, it's about the results. And that year when we got those amazing results, because I knew I was probably going to be fired, truthfully. But when you looked at my results, you can't really question the data doesn't lie. And so I became a master principal. I became a mentor principal. My teachers were the ones writing the curriculum for the entire district with 160,000 students. Results matter. And I know, Mary, I'm sorry, and just Sharon too, I'm sorry. I know that's not a good answer, but it is the reality.
I just wonder how they don't see that they sometimes higher up creates the situation that prevents the test scores that they want to see.
Right, I agree.
And unfortunately, like I said, I understand that. And I think two things come to mind. Number one, I never wanted to be part of the problem. So when I did move up into those positions, I made it a habit of really listening to teachers and being in classrooms. not to evaluate teachers. I just wanted to understand what was going on. And to get that feedback, you know, just like we say informative assessment with students, I did informative assessment with teachers all the time. Tell me what's working, tell me what's not working, tell me why it's not working, what do I need to do? So you can grow into being part of the solution. The other part of it is, guys, sometimes you have to, like I said, develop upwards. And what I mean by that is you've got to be willing to speak up and to share what's not working and why. But more importantly than that, bring a solution with you. So I'm sure my teachers, wink, wink, never talked to a school board member about how bad the curriculum was. I'm sure my teachers didn't talk in their neighborhoods over the backyard fence about how bad the curriculum was and what needed to be done. There's a lot of different ways, guys, to leverage influence and make changes. And I think you just have to, you understand your community better than anybody. So you have to look for those openings and opportunities to share information and affect the change. And like I said, it's painful and it's hard and it takes a really long time.
I do think that virtual gives us that opportunity because some of the extensions that we can use for real-time formative assessment, they compile that data even asynchronously. So the kid who watches the video because he missed my class can still do the pair deck. And a lot of them will even disaggregate it in a CVS file for us. So to me, that's documentation about what doesn't work.
Yeah, and I agree, Mary, that's a great way to do that. And, you know, if you've got a principal who's receptive to taking that data on forward and that information, all the better. So I think there's just, like I said, there's no great answer. It's a huge problem when you're dealing with senior leadership who doesn't always listen, who doesn't always understand. But with enough data and enough time, they usually will come around or they'll self-select out of this list, quite frankly. But yeah, you have a superintendent who's not getting student achievement, they usually only last about 2 to 3 years. I've outlived many a superintendent, particularly when I was in Dallas. Okay, well, I know we're over time, guys, so I apologize, but you know, good discussions. And Mary and Sharon, if you have any other questions, you know, we can talk offline anytime. Just email me and we'll set up a time to talk, okay? All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and end this because it is 8:07. I apologize, we're running a little bit late, but I will see you guys next week for our final meeting. Y'all have a good night. Bye.